This story explores mature emotional themes involving family dynamics, personal boundaries, and unresolved tension. It does not contain explicit content. Viewer discretion is advised. It happened during one of those silent family dinners where nobody knows what to say, but everyone's pretending everything's fine. You know the type. Forks scraping plates, eyes glued to food, tension thick enough to choke on. That night, the air felt charged, like something unspoken had been waiting too long to break through. My name's Lena. I'm 25, moved back home last fall after a rough breakup and a job burnout that left me half myself. My stepbrother, Mason, is 27. We were never close growing up. We were teens when our parents married, already set in our separate worlds. We shared a hallway but barely shared words. He was quiet, always off doing his own thing, never mean but never warm either. Just there. Until recently. We'd both ended up back at the house, orbiting the same space again. Only now, the silence between us started to feel different. Not cold. Just heavy. A kind of weight you notice when someone's near you a little too long, when their glance lingers a beat past casual. That night, I was clearing the table. Our parents had gone upstairs, probably to argue behind closed doors like they always did when they thought we couldn't hear. I turned around with a stack of plates in my hands, and he was there. Closer than I expected. Mason didn't say anything at first. He just looked at me. Like really looked at me, in a way that made me freeze mid-step. He wasn't smiling. His jaw was tight, eyes unreadable. I opened my mouth to break the weirdness with a dumb joke or something, but before I could, he stepped closer and gently touched my shoulder. His hand was warm. Steady. And then he leaned in and whispered, just 5 words. Quiet. Calm. But they hit me so hard, I almost dropped the plates. I know what you heard. Just like that. No explanation. No context. My mind raced. What did I hear? When? I hadn't told anyone about the argument I'd overheard last week, the one between our parents late at night. I'd been walking past their room when I caught pieces of it. Voices raised. My name mentioned. His, too. Something about keeping things quiet and not letting it happen again. At the time, I'd convinced myself I misheard. That I was being paranoid. But hearing Mason say that? I don't think I blinked for a full minute. The plates felt like they were made of lead in my arms. I searched his face for some clue, something that would turn this into a misunderstanding. But he didn't look confused. He didn't look sorry, either. He looked sure. Then, just as suddenly, he stepped back. Forget it, he muttered, brushing past me toward the stairs. But I couldn't forget. And I didn't. Because now, all I could think about was what I might have heard. What he knew I heard. And why the hell it seemed to matter so much to him. Whatever it wasn't nothing. And I wasn't ready to let it go. Not until I found out the truth. The next morning, everything looked normal. Sunlight hit the kitchen tiles the same way. The coffee maker groaned and hissed like it always did. But I couldn't shake what happened the night before. Mason's words echoed in my head, looping over and over. I know what you heard. He hadn't said it like a threat. He said it like a fact. Like something he'd been waiting for me to realize. I didn't see him that morning. His truck was gone by the time I made it downstairs. Typical Mason, early to leave, late to come back. The kind of guy who never really let anyone in. I always assumed he was just distant. Some people are like that. But lately, I wasn't so sure. Growing up, we were polite. Distant but civil. We never fought, never shared too much either. I'd hear him playing guitar through his bedroom door sometimes. He was good, better than anyone gave him credit for, but if I ever mentioned it, he'd shut it down with a shrug. Same with everything else. Mason kept things locked up. Even when his dad got sick 2 years ago, he barely said a word. Just disappeared into work and avoided the house for months. It used to frustrate me, that wall he built. Now, it just made me suspicious. By noon, I was back in the room I'd reluctantly moved into when I came home. Laptop open, tabs full of half-done job applications and rejection emails. But my focus was gone. My mind kept drifting, back to that whispered sentence, and back to the night I overheard our parents fighting. I remembered more now. My mom had sounded scared. Not angry, not upset, scared. She'd said something like she can't find out and he promised it was over. Then Dad, Mason's dad, cut in, voice low but firm, like he was trying to bury something that wouldn't stay buried. I never told anyone about it because I wasn't even sure what I'd heard. But now? Now I was starting to think Mason knew exactly what they were talking about. And somehow, I was in the middle of it. Later that evening, I found myself pacing the backyard, pretending I was out for air. I was really just trying to think, trying to figure out what this whole thing was about. I didn't want to believe Mason was keeping something serious from me. But why else would he say what he did and then walk away? I turned toward the house just in time to see his truck pull up. He saw me. Our eyes locked for a split second before he grabbed his keys and slammed the door shut. No wave. No hello. Just that same tension in his shoulders I was starting to recognize as a sign that he didn't want to talk, but might need to. I didn't go inside right away. I gave it time. Let him settle. Let the question build a little more in my chest until I couldn't hold it in anymore. When I finally walked into the living room, he was there. Sitting on the edge of the couch, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor like it had answers. He looked up as I stepped in. I need you to tell me what you meant, I said quietly. Last night. About what I heard. For a moment, he just stared. Then something flickered across his face, regret, maybe. Or fear. He opened his mouth to speak. And that's when the front door opened, and my mom walked in. Too early. Too soon. The moment shattered before it began. And just like that, Mason leaned back on the couch, swallowed his words, and said nothing. But this time, I wasn't backing down. My mom didn't say anything at first. She paused in the doorway, keys still in hand, eyes scanning from me to Mason. The way her jaw tightened told me she felt the tension immediately. She knew she'd walked into something, just not what. Mason leaned back into the couch cushion like he was trying to disappear. I didn't move. I could feel the question still burning in the air between us, hanging there, unanswered. Everything okay? She asked, setting her purse down a little too carefully, like if she made one wrong move, the room might shatter. Fine, Mason said, too fast. Flat. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Not without blowing it all wide open, and I wasn't ready yet. I needed answers, not denials. Mom glanced at me again, then moved past us toward the kitchen, pretending not to notice how no one was breathing. But I could tell, she knew. She always did. She just chose not to deal with things until they exploded. Once she was out of earshot, I turned back to Mason. You were about to say something. He stood up. No. I wasn't. Yes, you were. My voice was low, but sharp. And I think it has something to do with them. What they're hiding. What you've been hiding. Mason stared at me like he wanted to tell me everything and nothing at the same time. I watched his fingers twitch like he wanted to reach for something, maybe. The truth. But he didn't move. It's not that simple, he muttered. Then make it simple. He didn't answer. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept turning everything over in my head, every strange moment between us in the last few weeks, every time he lingered in a room just a second too long, every sideways look between our parents. Something was off. Something had been off for a long time. And now that I was finally seeing it, it felt like I'd stepped onto a minefield I didn't know how to walk through. The next day, a new thread pulled loose. I got a message from Sarah, my cousin on my mom's side. We hadn't talked much lately, not since I moved back. She asked if I wanted to meet for coffee. Said she heard things were tense at home. I didn't ask how she knew. Small towns have big ears. When I met her at the cafe, she waited until we were sitting with our drinks before saying, "Has anyone ever told you the real story of how your mom and Mason's dad got together?" I blinked. "What do you mean, real story?" She hesitated, then leaned in. "There were rumors back then. That something happened. Something messy. Your mom stopped talking to half the family for a year after it all came out. I never knew the full details, but there were whispers about a cover-up. About something your mom was trying to protect you from." I sat there, heart pounding. "I don't know if Mason knows," she added. "But maybe that's what he meant. Maybe what you heard wasn't about now. Maybe it was about then. It changed everything. What if the secret wasn't just between our parents, but about us? Something from the beginning. Something that would make sense of why Mason looked at me the way he did. Why his silence felt protective, not cruel. By the time I got home, he was gone again. No note. No text. And on the kitchen counter, a single photo I'd never seen before, me, as a little girl, sitting on a couch next to a boy who wasn't Mason, but looked just like him. I must have stared at that photo for 10 minutes, like it might start talking if I looked hard enough. The edges were worn, the colors faded, but the image was clear, me, maybe 4 years old, in pink overalls, holding a stuffed rabbit. And next to me, a boy just a little older, smiling with the same tired eyes Mason has now. Only it wasn't him. At least, not the version of him I knew back then. Because the truth is, Mason didn't move in until we were both teenagers. So why did we have a photo together as kids? My hands shook as I flipped it over. There was a date scribbled in blue ink, July 1999. And beneath that, 2 names, Lena and M. That was it. No last names. No hint of who took it. But suddenly I understood why Mason had left without saying a word. Why he didn't finish his sentence. He didn't need to. He'd shown me the one thing that asked more questions than I knew how to answer. I rushed upstairs, heart in my throat. I tore through drawers, boxes in the closet, old albums in the hallway cupboard. The kind of frantic search you only do when you know something's there, buried in plain sight. And eventually, I found it, an old envelope stuffed between a stack of tax documents in my mom's office. It had photos. Letters. Court papers. One of them was a custody form. My name was on it. So was Mason's. Under siblings. The air left my lungs like a punch to the chest. I wasn't just my mother's only child. I was Mason's sister. Half-sister. And they'd kept it from us. For years. A floorboard creaked behind me. I spun around, papers still in my hands. Mason stood in the doorway, face pale, jaw clenched. You found it. I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. They told me when I was 16, he said, stepping inside. Said it didn't matter. Said you didn't need to know. Said we were better off pretending. My voice finally broke through. Why didn't you tell me? Because I didn't want to break you. His voice cracked. Because I didn't know how. Because part of me wanted it not to be true. He looked away, breathing hard. I meant to tell you that night, when I said I knew what you heard. But then I saw your face. And he stopped himself. I took a shaky breath. All this time, we thought we were just step-siblings. We're not, he said. We're blood. My knees buckled, and I sat on the edge of the desk chair before I fell. The letters slid out of my hands and scattered across the floor. Why would they hide this? I whispered. He looked me in the eye. Because they weren't supposed to have us. What does that mean? He hesitated. There's more. Stuff I couldn't prove until now. I stared at him, heart hammering. What are you talking about? Mason pulled something from his back pocket, a folded-up document, stained and creased like it had been read too many times. He held it out. You need to see this, he said. But once you do, there's no going back. Before I could take it, we heard the front door open downstairs. Footsteps. 2 voices. Our parents. Home. And we were out of time. We barely had time to react before our parents stepped inside. The sound of the door closing echoed through the house like a warning shot. Mason stuffed the document back into his pocket, his jaw clenched tight. I scrambled to gather the papers, trying to hide them, even though I knew it was already too late for hiding anything. Footsteps climbed the stairs. Our mom appeared first, followed by Mason's dad. They both froze in the doorway, eyes sweeping over the scattered documents, the photo in my hand, Mason's unreadable expression. Mom went pale. You went through my things, she said quietly. I found out the truth, I shot back, holding up the photo. We're not just step-siblings. We're related. Why would you hide that from us? Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Mason's father stepped forward. Put the papers down. No, Mason said, stepping between me and him. No more lies. We know. But it was my mom who finally cracked. Her voice trembled. You don't know everything. Then tell us, I said, shaking. Tell me what you've been hiding my entire life. She exchanged a look with Mason's dad, a desperate, silent conversation that lasted only seconds but felt like a lifetime. And then, quietly, she said, Mason isn't your half-brother. The room froze. What? I whispered. You're not related by blood, she said. We told Mason he was, to protect you. Because we thought it would keep you both safe. Keep you apart. Mason stared at her like she'd slapped him. You lied to me? We thought you were getting too close, his dad said. It scared us. We didn't know how to handle it. You were young. We made a choice. My pulse thundered in my ears. So the photo? The custody form? Mom nodded. You were in foster care, briefly, before I regained custody. Mason was at the same facility for a few months after his mother passed. That's how the photo happened. You bonded, even as kids, before we ever knew you'd both come into our lives again. It was a coincidence we couldn't explain. When we realized who you were to each other, we panicked. You let me believe she was my sister, Mason said, voice raw. You let me carry that, live like that. Why? To stop something we didn't understand, his father said. And we were wrong. We should have trusted you. I backed away from all of them, heart pounding, mind spinning. So this entire time, the thing that's been eating away at me, the guilt, the confusion, it was manufactured? We were trying to protect you from yourselves, Mom whispered. And in doing that, I said, looking from one parent to the other, you ruined everything. Mason turned to me, eyes full of something I couldn't name, grief, anger, relief, all tangled together. So we're not related. No, his father confirmed. But the damage is done. I looked at Mason, and I saw the moment everything we thought we were shattered into something else. The truth was finally out. But it had come at a cost neither of us could measure. And now, the only thing more terrifying than what we'd believed, was what we'd do next. None of us spoke for a long time. The air in the room was thick, too thick to breathe, too loud to think. I stood there, trying to process what I'd just heard. Not siblings. Not blood. The lie had been the truth all along. But knowing it didn't undo the years spent holding back. It didn't erase the looks, the closeness, the confusion. And it definitely didn't explain why they'd rather twist our reality than trust us with it. Mason moved first. He turned away from them and walked into the hallway, dragging a hand through his hair. I followed, silent. When we reached the stairs, he stopped, hands on the railing, breathing hard. I don't even know who I am anymore, he said, without turning around. You're still you, I said quietly. We both are. They just tried to make us smaller than we were. He laughed once, bitter and broken. I tried so hard to bury it. Everything I felt. Every time I looked at you and hated myself for it. I stepped closer. It wasn't your fault. His eyes met mine. It wasn't yours either. And then the silence between us shifted again. Not heavy this time, just full. Like something had been cracked open, finally, and now the truth had space to breathe. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the photo again. They wanted to keep us apart before we even knew we were together. He stared at it. That's the part one can't stop thinking about. We were kids. And we found each other anyway. He turned to face me fully. So what now? That question hung in the air longer than it should have. We walked out of the house that night without another word to them. No slammed doors. No dramatic exits. Just a quiet understanding that what needed to be said had already been said, and nothing they could explain would make it right. We ended up at the lake we used to go to as teenagers. It was dark, still. Moonlight rippled across the water. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could finally hear myself think. Mason sat beside me on the dock, close but not touching. You know, he said, all this time I thought what I felt was wrong. But maybe the worst part wasn't what I felt, it was being told it had to be shameful. I nodded slowly. They made us doubt the one thing that actually felt real. He looked out over the water. I don't know what's supposed to happen next. I don't even know who we are anymore. I reached for his hand. Maybe we don't need to know right now. Maybe we just decide for ourselves. He didn't say anything. But he didn't let go. We sat there until sunrise. And just when the sky started to soften with light, my phone buzzed. One new message. No name. Just a number I didn't recognize. You don't know the whole story. Ask your mother about Atlanta, 1996. My stomach dropped. I showed it to Mason. He read it once. Then twice. What the hell happened in Atlanta? I didn't know. But something told me the truth we just uncovered was only part of the story. And whatever was still buried was going to change everything, again. We didn't confront Mom right away about Atlanta. We waited. Talked it over. Gave ourselves space to process. For the first time in our lives, Mason and I weren't reacting, we were choosing. When we asked her about Atlanta, her face fell. She admitted she'd been in a different kind of trouble back then. A relationship. An unplanned pregnancy. A decision to hide things that spiraled into decades of secrets. I was the child she almost gave up, and Mason had unknowingly crossed paths with me in the system before fate brought us back again. It wasn't some grand conspiracy. Just human fear. A chain of choices meant to protect, but ones that ended up hurting. We talked for hours. Cried. Yelled. Then talked some more. Eventually, Mason and I left again. Not out of anger, but because we needed our own space, our own version of truth. Not one handed to us. He moved to the city to start fresh. I followed a few months later, not for him, but for me. For once, we were two whole people, not two halves of a story someone else wrote. We're close. Closer than ever. Not confused. Not ashamed. And no longer defined by the lies. The moral? Family isn't just blood or names on paper. It's the choices we make, the truths we're willing to face, and the love we choose to carry forward.